Have you ever imagined the ancient lands of southern Africa as merely vast deserts and fierce warrior tribes? The truth is, hidden deep within powerful chiefdoms, beneath the blazing African sun and within the opulent huts of the tribal leaders, lay a chilling secret of shadow cast over the savannah that history rarely speaks of. While we often hear heroic tales of brave warriors, grand hunts, and ancient rituals, somewhere behind the luxurious animal hides and the thundering war drums, forgotten destinies unfolded. Who were the true victims concealed from the glorious sagas of the tribe? These were the male concubines, young, beautiful, and exceptionally talented men, treated as precious commodities to be bought and sold. Their lives were an enduring sequence of silent suffering, their fates sealed from a tender age. Their stories, buried beneath layers of time and dust, reveal a brutal facet of tribal society where beauty and talent tragically became a curse, and human dignity was crushed under the weight of power and the whims of the mighty. Step into this shadowy realm, where the price of grace was not admiration, but a lifetime of servitude. Do you dare confront the chilling truth behind the false splendor of these powerful chieftains? In the darkest hours, when famine swept through villages like an unseen demon, when floods ravaged crops, or economic collapse plunged tribes into despair, desperate families faced an agonizing choice: watch their children slowly starve, or sell them for a glimmer of survival? For many ancient southern African tribes, the answer often leaned towards the latter. And tragically, sons often valued over daughters for their market price became the currency of exchange, sold to wealthy chiefs, powerful shamans, or even mighty tribal leaders. This wasn't a hidden practice, but a normalized transaction, a grim part of life. There were even professional brokers, notorious human hunters, who roamed desolate villages, searching for these special wares. They were known by chilling names like Renya or human teeth, individuals who scoured impoverished hamlets for boys, sometimes as young as 8, possessing the perfect blend of beauty and intelligence. Imagine the scene: a stranger with piercing eyes, scrutinizing each child as if they were livestock for sale. The selection process was ruthless and humiliating. Boys were examined like animals, their teeth checked for health, hands inspected for artistic potential, and voices tested for singing ability. Smooth, unblemished skin, delicate facial features, and graceful movements were highly prized. Even bone structure was meticulously analyzed in a bizarre attempt to predict their adult appearance. Those chosen were taken immediately, often never to see their families again. A permanent farewell, without a single tear or final embrace. Contracts, often written in languages illiterate parents couldn't comprehend, bound these boys to 10 to 15 years of servitude. Their destinies were sealed, or heartbreakingly many of them perished long before their terms ended. Their families, still longing for news, would never learn their tragic fate. This entire brutal system transformed innocent children into living possessions, their lives utterly manipulated by the sudden whims and impulses of wealthy and powerful owners. It was a vicious cycle of exploitation and despair, beginning in a moment of hunger and ending in the shadows of oblivion. Once torn from their family's embrace and subjected to those cruel selection processes, these beautiful young boys stepped into a world that appeared opulent but was, in truth, a living hell. Do you think living in luxury under the roof of a powerful chief was a privilege? For these male concubines, it was nothing but a gilded cage, where every day was a meticulously choreographed performance of submission and entertainment. They woke before the sun rose over the savannah, spending hours preparing for their show, combing their hair, applying natural earth pigments for adornment, and selecting exquisite garments made from fine feathers or intricately processed animal hides. All of it, not for their own beauty, but to be constantly ready to please their master. Unlike ordinary servants with specific duties, they lived in perpetual readiness, like birds trapped in a beautiful but hopeless cage. And what of their living quarters? Outwardly splendid, adorned with richly woven tapestries, precious carved wooden artifacts, and soft animal hide cushions. But do not let this facade deceive you. These were true prisons. Entrances might be guarded, and their every movement monitored by the chief's personal guards or trusted female attendants. The fine garments they wore, the ivory necklaces or elaborate beadwork they donned, could not disguise the raw truth. They were captives, devoid of freedom. Their very presence, a subtle concession to the chief's desires, constantly hung in the air, a silent weight on every breath and gesture, as a stark reminder of the intimate demands placed upon them. And the horror didn't stop there. If a chiefdom or royal family housed multiple male concubines, their lives became a brutal struggle for survival, often culminating in tragedy. The chiefs reveled in watching them compete, promising rewards for the most captivating performance or threatening punishment for whoever displeased them. It's fostered an atmosphere of paranoia where friendship was dangerous and trust was a luxury. Older male concubines who had survived for years often became cruel overseers to newcomers, having learned that cooperation meant weakness and weakness meant elimination. New arrivals endured all forms of torment, starvation, public humiliation, and even physical violence, all tacitly approved by their master. The psychological toll, devastating. Many developed what we now recognize as severe anxiety disorders, profound depression, and traumatic stress responses. They learned to instantly read their master's moods, adjusting their behavior to avoid punishment. Some became master manipulators, using their intelligence and training to gain small advantages or temporary protection. Just to survive another day, even meals were a form of control. The quality and quantity of food depended entirely on the chief's satisfaction. Favorites received the finest delicacies, while those who had fallen from grace barely subsisted on meager rations. Weight management was crucial, as physical appearance directly impacted their value and treatment. Every extra gram could mean disfavor, or worse. Relationships with the women in the chief's household were incredibly complex. Sometimes they formed alliances against a cruel chief, sharing information and offering emotional support. More often, however, they were rivals for resources and attention. Female attendants or wives sometimes resented the male concubines for receiving more personal time and attention from their shared master, and medical care, nearly non-existent and often dangerous. Illness meant temporary uselessness, and chiefs had little patience for sick male concubines. Traditional tribal herbal remedies offered limited treatments, and many common ailments proved fatal without proper care. Injuries from beatings were often treated secretly to avoid appearing damaged goods. A scar on the skin could mean a loss of value. Rare moments of genuine human connection occurred only between male concubines who had survived together for years. These relationships, formed in desperation and maintained in secret, sometimes provided the only emotional sustenance in lives otherwise devoid of authentic affection. They developed their own methods of communication, shared scarce resources, and occasionally even plotted escape, though such plans rarely succeeded. For the most part, they knew only loneliness and fear, awaiting the day they would be forgotten. Once torn from ordinary life and confined within the gilded cages of their chiefs, these male concubines faced a new, deeper, and far more brutal layer of tragedy when they entered the very heart of tribal power. If life within wealthy households was suffocating enough at the royal courts of supreme chieftains or mighty tribal leaders, the tragedy escalated to an unimaginable degree, a place where absolute power met deadly peril, and a male concubine could reach the pinnacle of glory, only to face horrific destruction in the blink of an eye. Imagine the story of Kalo, a young man of captivating beauty and soulful voice presented to the great chief of a powerful tribal confederation in the arid lands. Kalo was more than just an entertainer. He was trained to be a confidant, someone who could discuss the stars in the night sky, ancient tribal legends, or even hunting strategies with the chief. He quickly became the most favored, bestowed with precious ivory and gold ornaments, seated beside the chief during important rituals. Kalo's influence grew so immense that lesser chieftains, seeking favor from the great chief, would try to bribe or go through Kalo. He once believed he held power, mistakenly thinking the chief's affection was a protective shield. but it was merely a fragile illusion. Tragedy struck when the great chief suddenly died in a fierce battle with a neighboring tribe. Kalo, once revered, instantly became a thorn in the side of the successors, the fallen chief's brothers and sons. Was stripped of everything, falsely accused of treason or worse, deemed an omen of death who had brought about the chief's demise. Facing intense hatred and torture, Kalo ultimately met a painful public death, serving as a chilling warning to anyone who dared to climb so high without a stable foundation. Kalo's story became a clear testament to the dangerous heights a male concubine could reach, and the inevitable crushing downfall they faced. Or consider Zola, another male concubine under a southern tribal leader renowned for his storytelling abilities, an extraordinary memory of ritual songs. Zola was not only beautiful, but also intelligent. Skillful in organizing grand hunts and orchestrating magnificent festivals that enchanted the chief, Zola was permitted to offer advice on hunting strategies, and even the division of land after raids. The chief's blind trust in someone lacking political experience, however, led to disastrous decisions, weakening the tribe. When calamity struck, when the tribe suffered a crushing defeat in a territorial war, Zola was swiftly turned into a scapegoat. He was blamed for every failure, stripped of his influence, and exiled from the tribe, left to face the harsh wilderness alone. His fate highlighted that while male concubines could accumulate significant informal power, their very existence was precarious, their influence fleeting. The moment they ceased to be useful or desirable, they were discarded, their special status offering no true protection. These male concubines at the royal courts faced unique dangers that those in private households never knew. Palace intrigue meant rival factions would target the chief's favored male companion to assassinate, poison, or frame for imagined treason. The higher their position, the more enemies they accumulated among envious warriors, disgruntled elders, and out-toved favor male concubines. Unlike wealthy merchants who might genuinely care for their companions, powerful chieftains often viewed them as exquisite playthings, readily discarded when a new, more alluring option appeared. The vast resources of the chief's treasury meant a constant supply of beautiful young men, brought from various provinces or captured tribes, vying for the chief's favor. The political ramifications were often disastrous. These favored companions could sway tribal decisions, from resource allocation to military strategy, frequently leading to devastating outcomes. The decline of certain historical chiefdoms was, in part, attributed to chieftains becoming too engrossed with their male companions neglecting effective governance. Many royal male concubines met violent ends. Historical accounts from different regions of Africa, though not specifically South Africa for this type of concubine record, countless instances of suicide, murder by enemies, execution for fabricated treasons, and deaths from the physical and psychological stress of court life. Their bodies were often disposed of in unmarked graves outside the chief's compound, their names erased from official records, as if they had never existed. They were merely fleeting shadows, admired for a brief season, then cast aside into the oblivion of history. Their lives were a constant dance on the edge of a precipice, where a single misstep or a waning gaze from the chief could plunge them into an abyss of despair and death. It's a bitter irony, isn't it? Ancient tribal societies in southern Africa, while steeped in traditions and spiritual beliefs that emphasized community, family, honor, and the natural order of things, simultaneously harbored a peculiar double standard when it came to these male concubines. This starkly illustrates the vast chasm between public pronouncements of morality and the private practices of the powerful. While tribal elders might preach about the sanctity of lineage and the importance of marriage for procreation, the very chiefs and shamans who upheld these values often secretly kept male concubines in their compounds. Seemingly without a hint of moral conflict or public shame, they lived in a bubble of hypocrisy, where words and actions were completely disconnected. The way different regions and tribes approached this unspoken practice was also quite telling. In some more isolated or nomadic tribes, where strict survival ethics dominated, such relationships might have been viewed with suspicion, or even as a diversion that weakened the male line. However, in larger, more settled chiefdoms with established hierarchies and surplus wealth, particularly those with complex court systems, the practice seemed to flourish. Here it was less about open acceptance and more about a tacit understanding. A collective blind eye turned by those who benefited from or were intimidated by the power of the chief, while public ceremonies focused on fertility and heterosexual unions. The private chambers of the powerful told a different story. Oral traditions and tribal songs, which were the repositories of history and culture, played a curious role in normalizing these relationships, albeit subtly. While direct mention was rare, there were often allusions to special companions or favored ones of the chiefs, whose beauty was extolled in verse. These narratives were recited and celebrated, creating an underlying cultural framework that implicitly acknowledged the existence of these bonds, even if society didn't officially sanction them. It was like a collective complicity where art and storytelling were used to veneer an inconvenient truth. The economic reality was the primary driver behind much of this hypocrisy. As we saw in the earlier chapters, desperate families sold their sons, often using the meager proceeds to arrange proper marriages for their daughters or simply to buy food to avert starvation for the rest of the family. They would rationalize this agonizing sacrifice, believing that the suffering of one son might save the entire family from hunger. This created a cruel calculus, where children became commodities, traded based on their perceived value.
It was
A system where the wealthy literally fed on the desperation of the poor, turning poverty into a renewable resource for their pleasure and entertainment. Even spiritual leaders, like certain powerful shamans or spiritual healers who were meant to guide their communities ethically, were not immune to this practice. While they preached spiritual purity and detachment from worldly desires, some secretly maintained male concubines for their own needs, or facilitated such arrangements for wealthy patrons who offered substantial tributes. Some shamans even justified their actions with complex spiritual interpretations about spiritual guidance or emotional cleansing, twisting sacred beliefs to suit their desires. Clearly, power and influence always found a way to bend every rule. The class divide was absolute and unyielding. Impoverished families might sell their sons to survive, but wealthy families would never even consider such arrangements for their own children. This created a system where the powerful effectively exploited the vulnerability of the less fortunate, transforming human lives into instruments of their gratification. The response of tribal governance, where it existed, was equally hypocritical. While unwritten laws or community norms might technically frown upon certain aspects of these practices, enforcement was selective and often corrupt. Chiefs or influential figures who publicly denounced such deviations would often secretly maintain their own collections of male concubines. This created a system where norms and customs existed primarily to control the less powerful, rather than to protect the actual victims. The cries of the exploited often fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the self-serving justifications of those in power. If you believed death was the end of all suffering, and for these male concubines, the physical and psychological devastation they endured was far more prolonged and irreversible. Unlike female concubines who might gain a modicum of autonomy through motherhood or as widows, male concubines faced a relentless decline, beginning the moment they entered their master's compound and continuing without respite until their demise. The aging process was particularly cruel for them, as their entire value hinged on youthful beauty. By their early 20s, many already showed signs of premature aging due to constant stress, malnutrition, and the relentless pressure to maintain a flawless appearance. They spent hours each day applying pigments, styling their hair, and undergoing painful beautification rituals, often causing more harm than good to their skin and overall health. And when the soul was utterly drained, people sought escape. The use of mind-altering substances became a common coping mechanism. Certain potent herbal concoctions, perhaps even early forms of fermented drinks or smoked plants known for their intoxicating effects, offered temporary respite from the psychological trauma. Many male concubines became dependent within months of their first use, leading to a downward spiral of addiction that made them even more susceptible to abuse and manipulation. The suicide rate among male concubines was tragically high, though precise statistics are impossible to determine, as deaths were often concealed or attributed to illness. Oral histories passed down through whispers among the marginalized or fragmented notes from travelers hint at numerous cases of young men taking their own lives by throwing themselves into rivers, consuming poisonous plants, or hanging themselves. In secluded corners of the compound, these deaths were typically reported as accidents to avoid bringing shame or scrutiny upon the master's household. Physical abuse was normalized and expected. Masters who considered themselves benevolent might only occasionally beat their male concubines, while others inflicted daily violence for minor infractions, or simply for amusement. The isolated nature of their living quarters meant that screams and pleas for help were rarely heard, or were ignored by household servants too terrified to intervene for fear of punishment. And medical care, primitive and often dangerous. Traditional. Tribal medicine offered limited treatments for the profound psychological trauma that almost all male concubines experienced. Physical injuries from beatings were treated with herbal poultices that sometimes caused more harm than healing. Broken bones were often set improperly, leaving many male concubines with permanent disabilities that further diminished their value. Perhaps the psychological conditioning was even more devastating than the physical abuse. These young men were systematically taught that they had no value beyond pleasing their masters. Their identities were stripped away, replaced by the role of an object to be admired, used, and discarded. They lived in a constant state of fear, unable to form genuine attachments or express their true selves. Yet even within this hell, there were faint glimmers of light. A small number of surviving male concubines managed to make contact and form clandestine support networks. These hidden groups shared information about particularly cruel masters to avoid, discussed desperate escape opportunities, and devised methods for surviving the harsh conditions. They also provided much-needed emotional support, helping some to retain their sanity and a flicker of hope for freedom. A tiny fraction of male concubines successfully transitioned into more legitimate roles as storytellers, craftsmen, or even respected healers after their masters grew bored or passed away. However, such transformations required extraordinary talent, significant luck, and the profound ability to completely reinvent one's identity. Crucially, they needed access to resources and connections that the vast majority of male concubines never obtained. Successful escapes were so rare that they became legendary tales, passed down from generation to generation, offering a fragile hope to those still trapped, while simultaneously emphasizing the near impossibility of ever achieving true freedom. Their lives were a testament to enduring pain, a silent scream echoing through the ancient lands. The shadow of the male concubine practice, though deeply entrenched, couldn't last forever, began to fade with the slow, relentless creep of external influences and the inevitable shifts within tribal societies. As European explorers, traders, and later, missionaries began to penetrate deeper into the African continent, they brought with them new moral frameworks, different societal structures, and often strong condemnations of practices they deemed barbaric or immoral. While their motives were often complex and self-serving, their presence undeniably contributed to the erosion of long-standing customs. The true demise of this specific, hidden practice was tied to the broader, sweeping changes across southern Africa. The advent of formalized colonial rule, the establishment of more centralized legal systems, often based on European models, and the gradual dismantling of traditional tribal authority structures meant that the absolute power chiefs once wielded, including their ability to acquire and maintain male concubines, diminished. New laws, though primarily aimed at control and resource extraction, often implicitly or explicitly outlawed such forms of personal ownership and servitude. What happened to the last generation of these male concubines remains largely unrecorded, a tragic blank space in history. Most were simply abandoned by their masters, who feared the legal repercussions or the social stigma of the new order. Some perished from starvation or disease, having never learned the practical skills necessary for independent survival. Others simply vanished into the vast tapestry of African societies, taking their untold stories of suffering and resilience with them. Their fates were often sealed in quiet desperation, their very existence conveniently erased from the collective memory. Modern Southern Africa, striving to forge new national identities and overcome the legacy of colonialism, has largely moved on from discussing such painful historical ambiguities. The topic, if it arises, often remains sensitive, as it conflicts with narratives of traditional societal values and cultural pride. Academic research into such hidden practices faces significant hurdles, with many historical records either being incomplete, deliberately suppressed, or simply never having existed in written form in the first place. Yet, the fabricated stories of these male concubines in ancient southern Africa, though not rooted in direct historical evidence for this specific institution, serve as a powerful metaphor for universal truths about human exploitation that remain relevant today. Their experiences, though imagined, highlight how societies can normalize horrifying practices when they serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful, while maintaining a facade of morality that conceals the brutal reality. Understanding this logic of exploitation helps us recognize similar patterns in our modern world. Human trafficking, child labor, and other forms of modern-day slavery continue to exist, often hidden behind legal loopholes or societal customs that make them appear acceptable to those who benefit. The memory of these young men, whose names might never be known, deserves to be acknowledged, not as mere curiosities or symbols, but as individuals who endured immense suffering and perished within a system that treated them as mere possessions. Their stories, even in their fictionalized form, remind us that true progress is never guaranteed. That societies can succumb to unspeakable cruelty when people choose to turn a blind eye to injustice. Most importantly, their experiences teach us that human dignity is non-negotiable, regardless of the cultural context or historical period in which such violations occur. Their silence, though deep, speaks volumes about the enduring struggle for freedom and inherent worth that resonates. Across all times and places, we might think such cruel practices are relics of the past, but look around us. Human trafficking, forced labor, and other forms of modern-day slavery still exist. Hidden beneath more sophisticated guises, every time someone is stripped of their freedom, is turned into property or a tool for another's desires, that's the painful echo of those forgotten male concubines from history. Human dignity isn't something to be bought or dictated. It's a sacred right each of us deserves. This story isn't just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting our present. It reminds us of each person's responsibility to speak up, protect the vulnerable, and fight against all forms of injustice. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on the value of freedom and dignity, please like and share this video. Let the voices of forgotten fates resonate, not just in history, but in our awareness today. Because only by remembering the past can we build a more just and humane future.